Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had an excellent lunch and is ready and raring to go. I should point out that these gentlemen didn't tell me there was a uniform before we were backstage. I feel slightly left out, guys. So do you guys want to start off by giving the audience a quick overview of who you are, what your companies do, and indeed where you're based, given geography is an important part of what we're talking about today?
Sure. So I'm founder and CEO of Kreditech, and we are a consumer lending company. And the key USP is rating technology that we developed to serve customers with no or very little information in the bureau. And we like to operate in markets where there's just a very weak bureau coverage. That's why we're active in Poland, in Spain, in Russia, in Mexico, and as of this year also in India. And interestingly, our headquarters is actually in Hamburg, Germany. So that means we are headquartered there. We do all the tech development there. We do basically all the, analytics, credit risk model developed there. But then we also have offices in all these markets. And this is where we are locally regulated and have a team on the ground that runs the lending business.
Brilliant.
So, Rob, co-founder and CEO of Kabbage. Kabbage provides working capital directly under its own brand in the U.S. We offer the same experience that we have in the U.S. through bank partnerships abroad. So it's really the bank's customer, the bank's balance sheet. But we operate right now in Canada, Mexico, Italy, Spain, France, and the U.K. Through those partnerships and sort of more to come. In terms of the size of the business, we put out about $5 billion to 145,000 customers in the U.S. And a lot more through these partnerships that I referenced. Our operations really are in the U.S. as well as we have about 70 people in data and analytics in Bangalore, India. And we're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, which is not Silicon Valley, which made a big difference when we were getting started.
Yeah, so I mean, two truly global companies here. I mean, I guess from what you've just said, given how widespread both of your sets of offices are, the question of a fintech capital, is that even a relevant question for you guys?
Well, I think, it depends, right? I think, so obviously, the way why we are set up, the way how we are set up is because we at some point started the business, probably even before fintech was really a term, and we said, well, let's go and sort of like build out the company, and then sort of like how things are evolving. Probably if I would now start another business, I would really take another look at what's actually the best jurisdiction I can possibly launch the business. And I was thinking about, but there's definitely a couple of factors that fall into place, and I would say first and foremost is actually access to talent. I think that's, I think nowadays probably for any tech business that you're starting, really relevant. But it's not only tech talent, it's actually also financial services talent. And that's, I think, some of the times just really underestimated, I think, how important actually financial services talent is. But next to talent, it's clearly, the regulator, how approachable is a regulator, how cooperative, how far can you build a relationship, if that's possible. It's access to capital, access to partners. Is there an ecosystem? And I think there are many factors that fall into play. So therefore, it's choosing the right place to launch a fintech company is definitely not an easy question.
Yeah, I think we'll dive into all of those things as we go through the session as well. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, look, we're in Atlanta, Georgia, so many people here are probably not super familiar with that particular city, but there's actually a large number of I would almost say old world fintech companies, GlobalPay, WorldPay, TSYS, First Data. All these companies are headquartered in Atlanta, and actually 70% of payments actually run through an Atlanta-based company in the U.S. So, and a lot of people don't know that. But I completely agree. You've got to look at talent. And talent goes in waves, by the way. Early on, when you really just Catherine and I were running the business principally, we were looking for technical talent and financial services talent, really great talent in Atlanta. But we eventually opened up a San Francisco office because there was not a lot of online digital media expertise in Atlanta. So we believe we actually needed to open an office where the talent for that type of role was, and we've taken that philosophy forward. So as you think about starting a company, the local area may be great. The one issue we're facing right now is hiring executive talent in Atlanta that we might want to hire from outside of Atlanta. So we literally built a pitch deck that's why Atlanta, right? Why should a senior executive at a big tech company, based in the Bay Area of San Francisco, move to Atlanta to take this role? Because they're thinking 2, 3, 4 positions down the line and don't see a path if they were to sort of uproot themselves and move to a different location.
And talking of your pitch decks, so if we want to talk a little bit about the ability to attract investment, it used to be the case, as I believe you know, Rob, that you had to go where the money was, and I'll let you tell that story. But do you think that that's still relevant, or do you think the money is more likely to come to you these days?
So I think investors are starting to get outside of their backyard. When we first started, it felt like investors were not, but in 2 ways. So we literally planted ourselves in the Bay Area for months and months and months to raise our first real round of capital because it just wasn't available in Atlanta, especially post-financial crisis. Just a quick side note, don't start a financial services company after the largest recession, in 70 years. But we were able to do that. And frankly, coming to conferences like this, telling our story and being out there is what's actually gotten our name outside of the U.S. And we've raised more money from an operating equity perspective outside the U.S. than we've raised inside the U.S.
Sorry, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think from a European point of view, I think it is true that indeed, there's less friction when it comes to being able to attract investors. I think particularly from U.S. investors. I remember, so we started Kreditech in 2012, and at the end of 2012, we were sort of like touring the U.S. to actually see if we can maybe find Series A investors somewhere from the Valley. And the very sort of like consistent feedback that we heard as well. We don't really want, or we don't really think that we are able to invest in Germany, which is now not really, it's not the most exotic place, to be honest. So I think nowadays, over the last couple of years, investors, particularly US investors, have been doing more and more and more deals in Europe and also in Germany. So that's why I think this is a bit less of an issue. But on the other hand, if you now say, well, you want to start your fintech company, let's say in Lithuania, because you like, their regulator and so on, then I do think it would probably be challenging for you to attract outside capital there.
That's interesting. And what about, both of you operating in Asia? There's obviously a lot of money in Asia as well. I don't know if that's something you've got experience of, but would you necessarily find it easier to attack maybe Chinese money if you're based out in Hong Kong and you've got local people on the ground? Is that still the case as well?
Well, look, I think the key is there's money everywhere in the world. And as an entrepreneur and somebody that's trying to build a business, it requires you to go find it. If you think you're going to sit in your hometown and just raise money in your hometown, even if you're in the Bay Area, you're doing your company a huge disservice. So we, in our Series E round, we had money coming out of China, money coming out of India, money coming out of Japan, and then in Europe, as well as the U.S. And then we closed our F round with SoftBank, obviously, which is a Japanese corporation. So, and again, getting outside of your comfort level, getting outside your geography was absolutely critical to that.
And I guess, so money is one thing, but another thing if you're looking at maybe global expansion or setting up somewhere else, what about culture? Is there a need for it to understand a cultural fit? So my company actually doesn't suit San Francisco. I'm much better off being Atlanta because of the sort of company I want to build. Is that an important consideration as well?
Well, I think that is actually very important, and I think it also really depends on what's your business model and what type of talent do you actually want to attract. So, for instance, speaking about Germany, right? You have Berlin, which is clearly an amazing city. I think with amazing development over the last couple of years. But generally, there's more of a sort of like creative thing. So it's actually difficult sometimes in Berlin, and to tell people, well, come to work at 9 in the morning, right? Because people have a bit sort of like of this laissez-faire lifestyle. And I think, for most of the financial services professions, let's look at accounting, risk, controlling. And so you have actually people that have a very different approach to work. So therefore, planning that is not necessarily so easy. I think ultimately, I think culture is very much shaped by how you manage and run a company, probably less by your surroundings. I would probably say it's different across countries. So yes, I mean, I think the way how to manage a team in India is different, the way how you manage a team in Poland, different how you manage a team in Germany. But I would say, I mean, the ultimate really, really important factor for building culture is, I mean, making sure you have the right approach to it as a company.
So when we launched our office in Bangalore in 2014, we were super focused on culture. We actually launched the first that office in Chennai with plans to move the office to Bangalore about a year later. So a year later, in order to make sure that we instilled the culture that we believed in, even in remote offices, Catherine, my co-founder, and I flew to Chennai one Wednesday morning, and we knew we were moving the company to Bangalore, and so we were going to look for office space. But what we decided to do was rent a bus. There was 20 people working in that office at that point. We all got on a bus, and we took a 7-hour ride through southern India. We were exhausted. Through southern India to Bangalore, and then we spent a day and a half looking at office space with those employees, and we chose an office space together with them. So they were invested in the process. We spent that 7-hour trip getting to know one another, probably better than I've gotten to know a lot of employees, even in the Atlanta office, and played games and all sorts of stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And so, I go back a couple times a year and spend a lot of time there. And so you have to bring the culture to the company, just like anywhere else. And I would say that the office in Bangalore is might be our best office in terms of the culture. It's certainly the most kick-ass designed office. It's beautiful. In fact, we opened it up on October 2nd last year, the new office. We had moved a couple of times, and I walked through. I was like, "How much did we spend on this?" Because it was beautiful, and it's a great place, and people, and the folks there are very, very happy.
One of the things that we found challenging, and I think clearly, I mean, what happens over time when you sort of like grow as a company is, I mean, you start basically opening sites in like all different locations. So, for instance, what we did is, I mean, we opened a service center in Romania, and that was quite helpful because we were able to find great talent for all the languages to basically provide customer service. And then we opened another company in Warsaw for technology development. We opened a business in India. We opened a company in Luxembourg to do our securitization. So you suddenly basically branch off and you have like all these different offices. One of the things that we do find, I mean, gets challenging after a while is to make sure that you actually preserve something like a consistent culture across the different sites that you have, and you need to, I mean, obviously your frequency of traveling, I mean, goes up quite a lot, actually both ways, because you want to bring people on site and you want to go there. And then generally, I think it is more challenging for, I mean, a business where you say, well, I mean, you have access to your customer, you actually have interactions with your customer, versus, I mean, if you like some, I mean, back office function that sort of like sits somewhere else, and that's something that we found challenging, and that can only be resolved, I think, with a lot of like extra commitment, I think, by management of making sure you show visibility, you're there, you basically bring culture.
Just to follow on a little bit, so two other things we add, and I completely agree with those comments, is we actually installed screens around each of our offices that are live video feeds of the other offices, so that you can actually feel like it's one office. So that's something we do. We've held a weekly town hall for the entire company, and we've done that every week since April of 2011. And it gets canceled. It's only like canceled like the Fridays after holidays, right before holiday weekend. So there's probably 49 or 50 a year we hold. We've done that from when we were 20 employees to now 450 employees.
So
really interestingly, we also have this weekly town hall. We can only do it at 3 p.m. European Central Time, because this is when people in India are basically still at work, and when people in Mexico just start working.
We had to realign, because we have West Coast, we have India, we have East Coast U.S. as well.
So a lot of what you've spoken about there, when you're talking about culture, is how you expand, how you move on from when you've got that initial base set up. If you were going to be setting up your company today, let's talk a little bit about regulation. Would that impact where you would start a company? I think there's two parts to this. One is, would that impact where you start the company? And secondly, obviously, regulation probably impacts where you expand into and which functions you have where as well.
Well, obviously you need to look at I mean, where do you do business, right? Let's assume, I mean, you do business in Europe. You ultimately want, and this is one of the great things, right? I mean, can get regulated almost in every country and passport. And now I think, I mean, there are different opinions basically about, I mean, regulators and I mean their approach to fintech and their sort of like, I mean, approachability and ability that you can, I mean, build a relationship. And I think that actually becomes really, really important nowadays. I think now, particularly in the sort of like post-PSD2 world, and you have basically all these new licenses, ASP, PASP, and so on. You really want to make sure that you go there. I think where you as a company have the best, I mean, relationship to the regulator. And I think it does make a big difference because, for instance, in Germany, even though, I mean, there has been, I mean, I think relatively quite some visible progress, it's still, I mean, a very different mindset of a regulator and probably what you find in the UK. I think my, I mean, recent favorite is actually Lithuania.
Your recent favorite, did you say?
Yes. And I'm actually quite impressed because I met people from the Lithuanian regulator over the last, quite frequently at the fintech conferences.
I've met them as well. They're very proactive. It's great.
Which is great. I think actually, I mean, if you look at it, you say, "Wow, this is great," because you can approach the regulator. But actually, on the other hand, they also see and learn what's happening out there in the world. So I think, I mean, exploring and actually, I mean, we are currently applying for a special type of license. We run a very detailed evaluation across the different possibilities in Europe, and I think this is really important to take time and see what best fits to your business model.
I think for, we operate directly in the U.S. and we picked our we basically picked our regulator through choosing a bank partner in the U.S.
Okay.
And so it's not so much where we're physically located as much as where how we want to be regulated. But in the U.S., the regulatory structure right now is hyper complex, simply because you've got sort of the federal government, which was very, very focused, and then during the new administration, the last year and a half, has de-emphasized regulation in financial services. But then you've got 50 state regulators who now have an opportunity to step up, and so it's very much. You sort of have to pay close attention to that. It's amazing how complex the business is. This is an area where we've got 12 people focused on nothing but this regulatory side, which is unbelievably large for a company of our size.
And that sort of brings me on to another question. You said the regulators in the US have an opportunity there maybe to work together, maybe to make things a bit easier. And I think in Europe we're starting to see a bit of this as well. Certainly the FCA has been quite willing to film what it calls fintech bridges. But it's the same idea. Do you have hopes that we're going to see more collaborative regulation going forward, which presumably would make it easier for you to open a business wherever you are, rather than having to go to the place with the friendly regulator?
So I think so. It's been, for us, we've always engaged. We believe in sort of early engagement and positive engagement with regulators. We see our role as being an educator of the regulators. We think about financial regulation. We also think about privacy and data regulation, simply because of the manner at which we acquire customers is they give us access to third-party data sources, and so it brings up a lot of concerns around privacy and data sharing. So we pay close attention to that and want to take proactive steps. The thing we worry about with regulation as it relates to data sharing and privacy is that you want to make sure that the regulation talks about the principles that you want enacted, as opposed to specific technical standards that need to be employed, because regulation will be on the books for decades and technology will change. The principles should be what lasts during that time.
Yeah, I basically agree to that. I think it's really about, I also, just speaking for the European Union, I don't think that it's particularly helpful to actually have a regulator which is perceived as, this is like, they're less caring and so on, right? There actually used to be even an issue like a couple of years ago with like Malta and Gibraltar and so on, where at some point they said, well, it actually was a reputational thing. They say, oh, you're a company based in Malta. Okay, well,
yeah.
That's
the end of that.
Something dodgy and so on. So I think it's actually important for a regulator to maintain basically a very, very strong reputation to the outside. And I think the really key difference is actually that that you're approachable, right? I mean that you are able to have a conversation with companies, also maybe in an informal way, before basically then going through the normal sort of like practices and so on.
So we're coming up towards the end of our time here. So I just want to sort of link two questions together, if you like. The first one is we haven't mentioned the B word for a while, so I'll sort of wrap the Brexit question into our final question, if you like. I have spent an awful lot of time in both Amsterdam and Dublin over the last few weeks. I think everybody else probably has as well. So those cities seem to me to be rising fintech hubs. Do you guys agree with that? And do you think that there's going to be somewhere else we're all going to be spending our time next year?
I think it's Frankfurt.
Okay. Place your bets now, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow, that one I haven't heard yet. But
No, at Frankfurt or Berlin, I think both are pretty good. I think, fintech cities, and I'll tell you why. I think, first of all, there's a great talent pool out there. I think in Berlin for tech and Frankfurt actually for financial services people. There's so many like frustrated people from Deutsche Bank, that are happy to work for a fraction of their salary.
Funny that.
for fintech company. You're close to the regulator. You have super favorable migration in Germany, so you can basically hire people from all over the world, with relevant qualification. They get blue cards and everything in less than 4 weeks. Language might be a bit of a challenge, but I think that's okay. You can get along. I think if it's English. So yeah, I think I think particularly
your money's on Germany.
Yeah, in a post-Brexit world, and I think Germany has seen. I think that there's also willingness to attract capital, not only sort of like for like seed rounds, but more recently also for growth rounds. We raised more than 100 million. N26 this year. Received more than 160 million US. So I think there's a good ecosystem.
Okay, bold. What about
started.
you, Rob?
So, look, obviously London is the financial services capital of Europe. But, with Brexit and frankly, just because you have financial services talent doesn't mean it translates into fintech. I was in Amsterdam for a different conference last week. I won't mention what it is.
That should remain nameless.
And then, there was talk that Amsterdam wants to be the fintech capital. Everybody wants to be the fintech capital. I don't know that it has any particular impact. I think Dublin is a great place. We've done a lot of work here, and it's a very welcoming community. And so I think there are different folks who are vying to be that. But for us, sitting in the U.S., all of those areas are easy for us to get to relatively. The time zone works pretty well. I'm not familiar. I haven't spent a lot of time in Frankfurt, but
you're going to be looking into it now.
Now I'm looking into it, without a doubt. That's my next trip, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to our audience for joining us as well. Please give my panelists a large round of applause, and welcome back to stage our MC.